This is Entrepreneur Authorities. Whether you're building a brand, scaling your startup, or getting started, get ready to be inspired, empowered, and equipped to take your next big leap. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and today I'm joined by Ernie Ross. Ernie is the founder of an award-winning branding and innovation agency whose campaigns have earned hundreds of awards. He's also the author of Intangience, a book that explores the hidden forces shaping how people think, feel, and connect with brands. Ernie created the Intangience methodology, serves as a certified advisor to the United Nations established University for Peace, and founded Rethink, a philanthropic organization focused on spreading kindness, happiness, and positive change across the Caribbean. Ernie Ross, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Doing very well, and thank you for having me.
You're very welcome, sir. And, I want to talk about your book and how it ties into a book I had previously read. So I'm not sure if you ever read Harari's book, Sapiens, years ago, but it was this big, dense history book, way over my head for many parts. But one of the big takeaways when he talked about the history of humankind was the idea that pretty much everything that we experience and go through in life nowadays is a construct that was created by another person, whether it's government, whether it's borders. It was just a human being set forth, money. Money is a human construct. No one knows what that means. So in the book, you argue that something only has value when it holds meaning for someone. When did that idea become clear to you?
Well, to do that, perhaps I should begin by giving a little background to where I was born.
Okay.
I was born in a country called Guyana. Some of you may be familiar with it, some not. It's sandwiched between Brazil and Venezuela, tiny South American country. Very wealthy today because they've discovered Mideastern proportions of oil. But at the time that I was growing up, we were under the grips of a dictator for about 3 decades. And there was a scarcity of everything, including the freedom to speak. And it was ironic to me that a government that controlled everything, they controlled 90% of the economy, everything had been nationalized, they controlled all media channels, if you can call them media, and yet there was no resonance. There was no resonance to the message. And 2 things I learned from that experience. The first was that scarcity gives something value. Anything in life that is scarce becomes valuable. The second thing that I learned was that you can control all media channels, but if the message is not resonating, it makes no difference at all. And you see this played out all the time. A lot of advertising today is propagandist in nature, but is the message resonating? You don't need to live in a dictator to understand that unless you develop a message that deeply resonates at a visceral level, it's just not going to connect. But what creates that authentic human connection is what I call derivative meaning. Any single brand you can think about in the world has a derivative meaning. How is it possible, as an example, that you can have a beverage that is 38 grams of sugar, has no nutritional value, you do not sell it on flavor, and you can achieve 1.9 billion units across the world? In fact, the most known English word across the entire planet, for any culture, is the word okay. And the second most recognized word globally is Coke. So how could a company producing a beverage that is not sold on flavor make that kind of global impact? And the answer is in that derivative meaning. Coke is not in the beverage industry. They're in the industry for satisfying the craving for human connection. That's it. And so that it reinforces the principle that something only has a value when it has a meaning to you. Intangience, which is a portmanteau of the phrase intangible values and the science of human connection, is about how to learn that language. If large brands can do it, how can you achieve it, both in your personal and in your professional life?
I love that. That's so good. And it's so funny you bring up Coca-Cola because I remember I was hearing a podcast the other day where someone was talking about the longstanding nature of Coca-Cola and the fact that it's been around for hundreds of years and there have been countless cola ripoffs. But at the end of the day, Coke is where it's at. And I think that was one of their slug lines at one point. But you know what's funny? I remember years ago when I was working in radio, Ernie, and Pepsi was a client of ours. And we would have to train ourselves that when we went out to dinner or we went to events with them to not say the word Coke. Because for whatever reason, when we think of cola, we automatically think of Coke. And there's something special about that. It's sort of like, Xerox becoming the catch-all for photocopies. And there are certain words like Google for search. What is it about that, the magical nature of that word Coke and the way it connects with people, where we almost have to retrain our brains to not say when we're dealing with someone from like Pepsi-Cola?
It's what I call the industry of human relationships. That's why Coke doesn't consider themselves in the beverage industry. In fact, you know what is Coke's stated objective? To have you to experience the product when you are not consuming it. Imagine that. That's a huge objective. And it's really based upon the idea that we can have this product be an embodiment of something that consumers around the world crave. What do they crave? Human connection. So Coke is in the human connection business. But it's not just sufficient to say, I will be in that. You have to develop techniques and devices that are able to do that at a very visceral level. And they've done countless things. They've put the personal names on the brand, removing the logo. They've created the world's first drinkable billboard. They've put these machines in college campuses where when the kids first going to college, they get free Coke, but the bottles cannot open unless they connect the two bottles together. They've done all kinds of techniques and devices to reinforce the coming together of people around the world, which is why it's so recognized today.
One of those examples, Ernie, is they own Christmas. Think about it. When you think about Christmas nowadays, you think of Santa Claus with that Coke glass. And I know that was because years ago they did that advertising campaign where I guess they discovered that people were mostly drinking Coca-Cola during the warm months, but then they tried to figure out a way, how can we get people to drink Coca-Cola all year round? Hence the giant Santa Claus campaign, which still survives to this day.
Absolutely. So the question is, how do you tell that emotionally compelling story? It's one thing to define it. Here's a further example, Joe. You pay $11.5 million for a 1-minute ad on the Super Bowl. 11.5. So imagine that very transient medium, 60 seconds on the clock. You've got a massive audience, hundreds of millions of people. And the ad agency is required to communicate to that multitude of people, different cultures, backgrounds, ethnicity, whatever it may be, and create that emotionally compelling response. How do you do that? So in the Intangience program, we go through a series of schools of thought. One is called Pillars of Purpose. The other is called Currency of Conversation. And the last one is the Science of Human Connection. The first Pillars of Purpose is about how do you build the architecture from the consumer's point of view. And the three pivotal questions are, who am I? Who am I to you? If I stripped you of your name and your identity, for what you're familiar with, as a father, as a podcaster, as a brother, husband, what would you be to me? The second is, what is my purpose? How am I fulfilling a purpose that's greater for you? And finally, the question of how will I be remembered after the first lingering moments of an interaction? What lingers with you? And that takes us to what I call a universal truth, a universal insight. As for Coke, it might be, everyone in the world wants to be happy. And that universal insight then becomes the basis of all the stories that are told. I can show you ads that run for the entire 58 seconds of that 1 minute, and there is not a single reference at all by visual or verbiage of the product or service. But they're telling a story that is an embodiment of the intangible value that product or service wishes to communicate universally. And once you can lock in on that, that's your magical moment. So to answer your question of how Coke has been able to do it, they're master of the art of it. Recently, 2 years ago, I did an address at the Global Happiness Summit right here in Costa Rica, the United Nations University for Peace. And my address was on Coca-Cola. I could hear the murmur in the room because this was a gathering of gurus and people of like mind around the world thinking about how to be happy. And I said to them, don't shoot the messenger. Coke has mastered the art of that message. In fact, Recently, Coke has felt they've crowded the happiness space. They've now moved into another space. The new campaign is real magic, the magic of human encounter. So from taste to feeling, to open happiness, to now real magic, the magic of human encounter. The ramble through all of this really is pivotal to this critical point, that something only has a value when it holds a meaning to you. If I can discover what has a meaning to you, then I'm in the game. Worth is a different thing. Worth is what the market is willing to pay for it. Value is the meaning that it has to me. But what gives it worth? The extent to which I believe in the values. It takes you back to the core point, meaning. What does this mean to you? So in developing any message, whether it's an interpersonal relationship or a professional scenario in terms of branding, the pivotal point will be, what does this mean to you? So if I can find that filtered through the intangible values you have, I have now begun to hit the point of authentic connection with you.
I love that. That's great stuff. And Ernie, it's funny because I was stalking your Instagram and I'm going to paraphrase something, but I found one of your reels. You said something about the point that advertising doesn't work. And, we've been touching upon advertising with the Super Bowl, the way Coca-Cola does it. But, again, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but you essentially say like advertising as a whole doesn't work. It's got to be, there's more to it. For a lot of people, there's massive industries that say, yes, advertising works and you can't do it without advertising. So take me through that argument.
Yeah. Well, the point is, if an ad appears as an ad, it has already failed. If I walked up to you and I said, I want to sell you something, there's the first turnoff. But if I just connect with you through my understanding of who you are, what you're about, what your interests are, what your values would be, I have then, beginning from a point of your perspective rather than mine, ads that just put out factual information. We don't live in a functional world. We're essentially sentient beings making decisions that are emotional. I can even convince you of a fact, whether it be religiously, politically, socially, whatever. And you can say you're right, but I still feel this way. I will still vote this way. I will still have this faith because it's about how I feel. So that ads that come out just giving you functionality will fail. They represent themselves as something that is just entirely there to try to persuade you to a point of view that you might resist. So the better way is to have a conversation that really deeply connects at an emotional level to be able to convince you of any particular thing. How many times have we seen in the world politicians elected, people having a faith that you can't understand? Here's a simple point to you, to show you the essence of intangience. And I don't know if this is appropriate for the audience, but I'll put it out there anyway. Supposing there was an atheist speaking to a spiritual person, and the atheist says to that person, I do not believe in the existence of the God. And the spiritual person says, okay, I accept that, and I do not believe in the existence of an atheist. Now, intangience is about that, being able to have whole in equal weight two conflicting opinions, but by the way I frame it and present it to you, it becomes so compelling to get my point across to you. Now, it is a question of what we're talking about there in that particular context is disbelief. The belief in one and the disbelief in another. But by framing it differently, the whole perspective begins to shift. Einstein has a theory. The formulation of a problem is more essential than its solution. The way you formulate a problem, the way you frame it, will give you the answer. So that if you say, how do I stop this war? As opposed to what are the essential ingredients in this issue before us, you will frame it the wrong way. As an example in my country, do I say, how do I stop the ethnic tension? Or how do I create social and economic equality? By shifting the framing of that question, you will get to an answer that is genuine or real. So that intangience is about helping you to shift that perspective to get to the real issue. The atheist example was just one that stops you in thinking, well, okay, so I exist, I am an atheist there telling you, and I am saying, and I'm a spiritual person telling you that I don't believe that that you exist in that theory. So that if you take that thinking towards branding or your business, it opens a whole new area, an avenue for you. As a further example, I owned a flower shop and you owned a flower shop right next to me, and we were competing. We had the same quality, the same kind of products and so on that we're offering in the marketplace. What would differentiate me? Now, using the Intangience principles, and I went through what business I'm in, I could determine that I might not be just in the flower business. As an example, what would be the one day of the entire calendar year that I would sell more roses than any other point?
I mean, I'm going to be Valentine's Day.
Absolutely, you're right. You're a romantic man. So that don't give your wife the flowers the day after, right? So on that day, more roses will sell than any other time. So are we selling the roses at that point, or the embodiment of what the roses are? So if you filter it through further, you can say, well, why do I just need one day? I am obviously not just in the business of selling flowers. If I look at it as an embodiment, I'm in the business of acknowledgement, because I can send you flowers for an apology, for congratulations, to express my sorrow for your bereavement, whatever it might be. So I'm in the acknowledgement business, not just the flower business. And that will completely redefine my business. I may start offering gift cards, teddy bears, singing telegrams, and I will train my staff to acknowledge the customers coming through differently, because now I am in the acknowledgement business, much like we determined with the Coke example. So that it's really about that shift of perspective. How can you look at your offering differently, filtered through the lens of the consumer's perspective and telling an emotionally compelling story?
That's good stuff. I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, and it ties into the idea of messaging, because you write about the difference between a propagandist message and a poignant message. How can a leader tell which one they're creating? We mentioned propaganda in terms of dictatorship rules. So stepping away from that side, most ads can feel like propaganda. So tell me about that distinction between the two, propaganda and poignant.
Propaganda is really, that point was really to be measured by your buying media, but your message is off. So you can spend, I wouldn't want to quote the specific political campaign for want of knowing a particular group, but there is a campaign run in the United States where one candidate outspent the other by $208 million. And when I asked supporters of that particular political group what was the message in that particular candidate, they cannot recall it. Yet that was outspent by $280 million. So the difference between propagandist messages and poignant messaging is well illustrated by a cartoon I have in the book done by Jim Benson that I got the authority to print. And it's that of a turkey standing with a wooden peg. And he's eating, holding a drumstick, and he's chomping away at it. And he says, wow, am I not delicious? So it's about the cannibalism of the message. The only person enjoying it is the person putting it out there to their own self-destruction. So the idea of a poignant message is, how do I create that message that really resonates deeply with you at a fundamentally important level? That's poignant messaging. Everything else is just propaganda. Politicians are using it for ill intent at times. So you see it in the area of religion, where people are blindly follow a particular dictate or doctrine without much assessment themselves, and that's because they just buy into the poignancy of a message that has not been filtered through their own thinking, their own rationalization. So in the area of, and by the way, this reinforces the whole point of the intangible world we live in. We don't live in a very tangible world. Our versions of reality has been dictated and influenced by so many things, our upbringing, our faith, our politics, or culture. So that is what really determines how we perceive the world. How do we change it? We shift the perspective. How do you shift the perspective? There are 9 principles we go through in Intangience that shows you or guides you on how to shift your mind and the perspective. I'll tell you this little story. In our offices at Rethink, the home of Intangience, there's a very unusual art object as you enter the office. It appears to be a mirror that is cracked with a broom perched against it. And most people come into the room and they say, this beautiful office, and they say, why do you have this broken mirror with the broom? And I have them stand in front of it and I say, you tell me. And they come up with all kinds of things that represents the fragility of life and so on. But it's really a concept done by a conceptual artist called Leandro Erlich from Argentina. And it's an illusion. He's created an open frame, put a sort of frame of wire running along it that looks like a crack, put a broom in the front and a broom at the back. And you can see right through this object, but you are under the impression of the illusion that it's a mirror. And to me, it represents that principle that we don't see the world the way it is, we see the world the way we are. On our challenge in life is to question those versions and interpretations of reality and ask ourselves deeply, from the other person's perspective, what is the reality that I'm looking at? And how many versions of that can there be for me to be able to really communicate effectively with you?
That's great. I love that piece of art. That sounds awesome. I got to get
a
copy of those.
Amazing piece.
I want to go back to the political point that you made, because you helped create political campaigns during major moments in Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago. What did political messaging teach you about like emotional forces, you know, in terms of like how it affects people at sort of like a cellular level?
I got a call from the female candidate in Trinidad and Tobago, who's the current prime minister, by the way, once again. And at that time, the country had never seen a female prime minister. It's a sort of more patriarchal society. And it's very difficult for that breakthrough to happen. So she said to me, look, I really want to become the candidate for the prime minister, but I don't have the funding. What could you do that would create a talking point in the country for me? And at that time, the newspaper reading was not what it is today, where people are on social media. Social media existed at the time, but still a lot of people read the local daily newspaper. So I booked an ad in the classified section of the newspaper that said vacancy. In the employment section, unemployment was high. And it said vacancy for the post of prime minister. The candidate cannot be corrupt. He cannot be arrogant, and so on. A list of things that people felt the current leadership embodied. And this thing went viral. It was on radio, it was carried on television, just one simple vacancy ad. And it did not have her name. It had at the bottom, voiceofthepeople.org. And everybody hit that, and they heard her message that it was time for a woman to take over and start bringing the nation together again. Now, the point to that question was, you need a singular point of reference, a consensus that will cut across all boundaries, and you've got to be creative in your ability to do that. So that there are many examples in your last political campaign where one candidate was very effective in doing that. Very, very effective in doing that. Again, I'll stay away from mentioning it so that I don't create any conflict.
We know what you're talking about, but go ahead, Ernie.
You can see one person manipulating that media message very effectively, and another person not doing it as effectively. So unless you're able to understand it, even if your message is strong, if you are not able to create those creative devices and techniques, it will fail, especially in today's market where people can't even determine what is fact and fallacy, what is real and not, in the digital world we live in. Another example of that was in Guyana. But before I go on to Guyana, I'll ask you a question that I ask a lot of Americans. When Hillary Clinton was going up for the presidency in the United States, if she had won, everybody felt that she would have been the first female president in history. Yeah. Well, I put it to you, there was another woman who was born in the United States, who became the president of a country, not the United States. Do you know who that might be?
Was it your candidate in Trinidad and Tobago?
No. She became the prime minister of Trinidad and Tobago. It was the president of Guyana. Her former name, or before she was married, was Janet Rosenberg. And she was from Chicago. and spoke with that accent until the day she died. Her husband was in office. He died, and she contested the election and won. Was the first American-born president,
Wow.
female, anywhere in the world. As just a little factoid. But the reason I referenced it now, to your point about how do you create these campaigns on the visceral point, the country is very divided between the African and Indian population. And this is coming to the closure of the dictatorship in 1992. Jimmy Carter had gone down and set up the Carter Convention to return Guyana to democracy. And at the time, I had a fledgling creative boutique, and I decided to gift the opposition party the campaign. That was the first, ironically, American-style campaign that billboards and TV ads, and that was not heard in that part of the world. And I was thinking, how do I get, what message can I couch in a way that both groups would identify with? And when I was leaving, in fact, I should say when I was escaping Guyana in the 1970s, I think it was, of the dictatorship at the time, there was a message someone had scrawled on the airport that said, "Will the last one to leave kindly blow out the candle?" And I remembered it at the time. And it was because that Guyana's infrastructure had failed, from roads to electricity to water. So the country survived either on generators or lamps that people would light at night. By the time the election come around, it had improved somewhat, so the televisions were on again. But virtually every day, you'll have a minimum of 5 to 8 hours of power failure. So what I did was a black and white TV ad that had a candle and a clock ticking, no words at all, just dramatic music. And it melted in 30 seconds. It became a puff of smoke that said, "Time's up, Desmond." Desmond was the name of the competing dictatorial candidate at the time. And the message just resonated across the country. People would light candles. Every time there's a power failure, they would invoke the phrase, "Time's up, Desmond." It was that ability to be able to create a message, even if there is no verbiage, no voice to it, that would resonate at a visceral level. So to answer your question in terms of the political sphere, that's those experiences taught me, that beyond the policies and the manifestos and the programs, what techniques and devices are you using to really connect to people at an emotional level, to trigger a response from something that they feel? That, to me, was that ability to do that.
That's excellent. And lastly, before I let you go, recently you were at the Disruptive Leadership Conference in Miami, where the Caribbean's premier leadership folks got together. For us Americans, as you know, we're a bit nationalistic in terms of, the world revolves around us. But give me a level set. Tell me what's going on in the Caribbean. Tell me about the people you got to speak to at the conference. Tell me about just the whole vibe in the Caribbean in terms of leadership and entrepreneurship right now.
I got asked by Adam Whitty, CEO of Advantage, what was the value of the marketplace in the Caribbean? And I was stumped. I didn't even know. I just knew it was very valuable. So I had to dive into it. And if my memory serves me correct, it is in the excess of $400 billion US. That's the marketplace there. Wow. And it's a marketplace often overlooked. But there are clients that I have there who run multi-billionaire organizations involved in everything from energy to breweries, to media, to banking. It's a massive market and one that flourishes from Guyana, which today, by the way, is considered per capita the richest country in the world. 83,000 square miles, 750,000 people, bereft with gold, diamonds, sugar, rice, bauxite, lumber, seafood, country that feeds itself, those 750,000 people, and now Mideastern proportions of oil and natural gas. And so that the economic growth is something like 27%, unheard of any time in the history of the world. So you're going from that all the way to Jamaica, that has turned around its economy, Trinidad and Tobago, that is re-emerging under the new government that is there. And you've got real abundant opportunities across the region in a multitude of areas of investment. And you're seeing more and more of that awareness now globally of that. Trinidad and Tobago, by the way, has just been voted a member of the United Nations Security Council, so that more and more Caribbean countries are holding their place in the world, and it's a market that has sometimes been overlooked in the past, but I think that is changing as you see more and more investments from the US, by the way, coming into the region.
Well, I think the reason it could be overlooked, this is my anecdotal, but I mean, when people think from the States of Caribbean, I think tourism, vacation, that is basically the economy rests upon that, and people from other foreign countries coming to visit. But it sounds like you're painting a picture that it's gone way beyond tourism.
Yeah, that you're not incorrect in saying that some of the smaller islands, such as Antigua and Barbuda, is primarily tourism. But even some of those hotel chains like Sandals have investments above and beyond their tourism industry. So that while it is true to say as a general rule, maybe Guyana and Jamaica might have been outstripping that, but as a general rule, vacation is the main income earner. The investments are well above and beyond that in terms of manufacturing and agriculture and other areas that foreign companies take part in and buy their products from. Here's an example. When you buy a Tesla vehicle, I don't know if this is still true, it was true up to 2-3 years ago. When you buy a Tesla vehicle in the United States, the company that backs it is from the Caribbean, Guardian Group, the Guardian Group wealth management group in the Caribbean. So there are stories and things that have not been told, but the right people know. Yeah.
That's excellent. It sounds like they need to hire you to do some branding and advertising. So, hey, Caribbean, call up Ernie Ross.
I think I need to do some more podcasts with Joe. That's what I think.
Yeah, it couldn't hurt. Lastly, I want to plug Intangience. After someone finishes this book, what's the first exercise or change you'd recommend they make in a way that helps the way they communicate?
I think to begin by asking the question, what am I actually offering to this individual beyond functionality? What is the emotional space I wish to occupy based upon their shared intangible values? That is the beginning of it. Whatever it is industry you're in, how innovative your product or service may be, begin by asking that question. From your perspective, what am I offering you? It'll take you to a whole new area and avenue of opportunity.
He is Ernie Ross, the book Intangience, How Human Connection Creates Value Between People, Brands, and Ideologies. Ernie, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Much appreciated. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I look forward to seeing you in Costa Rica.
And that'll do it for this episode. If you're an entrepreneur ready to grow your industry recognition as an author and Entrepreneur.com contributor, go to authorities.entrepreneur.com.